Will cremation block my resurrection? What the Bible and Jung really say about our ultimate destiny. Perhaps you have asked yourself this question in a moment of deep uncertainty, or perhaps someone very close to you has been cremated, and you find yourself plagued by a fear that most people never voice aloud, a fear whispered in the darkest hours when nobody is listening. What if the body cannot rise again because it no longer exists? What if the flames have consumed not just flesh, but also the possibility of resurrection? This question holds a power far beyond what appears on the surface, because embedded within it lies something even more profound about how we understand existence itself, about embodiment and spirit, about the relationship between matter and soul, and most crucially, about what it truly means to be resurrected in the deepest sense of the word. If you have ever wrestled with these questions, if spirituality has called to you yet you have felt torn by the physical reality of your being, I invite you to subscribe to this channel and activate your notifications so you do not miss this exploration and the entire series we are building around the integration of all dimensions of existence. Because what we discuss today will transform not just how you see death, but how you inhabit your own body right now, in this very moment. There is a pinned comment below, and a full description with resources that will guide you deeper into this work. So please check those out as we unfold this mystery together. Now back to the heart of this matter, because the question of cremation and resurrection cannot be separated from a far more intimate investigation into what resurrection actually means, according to both ancient wisdom and the psychology of the deepest human transformation. You have been taught that the body is merely a vessel, something temporary, something that will decay and disappear. You have been told this so many times that you have perhaps internalized it completely, accepting it as obvious truth. Yet something within you rebels against this partial understanding, does it not? Something in your embodied experience knows there is more to this story. Because if the body is truly insignificant, why does it matter so much how we treat it? Why does the presence or absence of a physical tomb affect us so profoundly? Why does holding a loved one's hand feel like touching eternity itself? These questions emerge from a wisdom that has been suppressed in modern spirituality, a wisdom that Carl Jung spent his entire life recovering. The body is not separate from the soul. The physical and the spiritual are not opposing forces locked in eternal conflict. They are expressions of a single, unified consciousness seeking wholeness. When we understand this, truly understand it, the question of cremation transforms entirely. It is no longer a question about whether ashes can resurrect. It becomes a question about how we reclaim our wholeness in a world that has taught us to fragment ourselves. Consider what has happened to modern consciousness. We have inherited a dangerous split, a wound running through the very center of spirituality itself. On one side, we have the transcendent impulse, the desire to ascend, to escape the body, to reach toward the divine. On the other side, we have the embodied impulse, the reality of flesh, sensation, desire, mortality. For centuries, spiritual traditions taught that these two must be opposed. The body is the prison, the spirit is the escape. Ascension means abandonment. And so, generation after generation, billions of people have lived split existences, denying half of themselves in pursuit of an incomplete spirituality. The resurrection of Christ in Christian theology, and here Jung's psychological insight becomes absolutely essential, was never meant to be a purely spiritual event. The resurrection was embodied. Jesus rose with a body. He could be touched. He ate. He appeared in physical form. This is extraordinary, and yet it has been almost entirely obscured by centuries of disembodied theology. The resurrection was not the escape of a spirit from a body. It was the radical integration and transformation of matter itself. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of the marriage between conscious and unconscious, between spirit and matter, between the masculine principle of transcendence and the feminine principle of embodiment. True individuation, the goal of human development according to Jung, is not the triumph of spirit over body. It is the conscious marriage of opposites. It is the alchemical union. And this, extraordinarily, is exactly what resurrection truly means. Now let us examine what cremation actually represents in this deeper context, because the fear about cremation blocking resurrection is really a fear about fragmentation, about dissolution, about the possibility that if we scatter the ashes, something essential about who we are will also scatter. But here emerges a profound truth. The body already scatters. The body already dissolves. Whether you are buried in earth or reduced to ash, the material process is identical. Both earth burial and cremation return the body to its constituent elements. Both restore what was borrowed from the earth back to the earth. The difference is temporal, not essential. Burial is slower dissolution. Cremation is faster dissolution. But dissolution itself is inevitable, and it has always been inevitable. From the moment of birth, your body has been engaged in continuous dissolution and renewal. Every cell in your body is being replaced. Every atom is cycling. Your physical form is in constant flux, and yet you remain fundamentally you. This is the first resurrection already occurring within you, and you do not even notice it. You are already dying and being reborn continuously. So the question is not whether the body will be reduced to its elements. It will be regardless of your funeral choices. The real question is far more personal, far more psychological. What are you refusing to accept about dissolution and impermanence within your own being right now? What are you clinging to, desperately trying to preserve, trying to keep intact, which cannot be kept intact? And how does this clinging prevent your own spiritual resurrection? This is where Jung's work becomes illuminating. He observed that the fear of death, the fear of dissolution, is not fundamentally a fear of physical non-existence. It is a fear of the dissolution of the ego, the constructed self, the personality we have spent a lifetime building and defending. The ego fears its own death more than the body fears physical death, and spiritual resurrection cannot occur until there is a willingness to undergo the death of the false self, the constructed personality, the small self that we defend so fiercely. When you look at your own life, you can see this pattern clearly. You have constructed an identity. You have built defenses around it. You protect it. You promote it. You fear its destruction more than anything else. And yet this constructed self is not who you really are. It is a mask, a persona. Beneath it lies something far vaster, far more authentic, far more connected to the divine dimension of existence. And the resurrection that matters, the resurrection that actually transforms your life, is the resurrection of that deeper self, the emergence into consciousness of what Jung called the self, with a capital S. This self is not you, the individual ego. This self is something far greater. It is the totality of consciousness and the unconscious. It is the divine principle expressing itself through your particular form. And the resurrection into this self can only occur after the death of your previous attachment to the small self. Do you understand what this means? It means that when your body dies, when your physical form is reduced to ash or dust, something profound is actually occurring on the psychological and spiritual plane. The shell is dissolving so that the essence can be freed. The form is being returned to the ground so that the formless can rise. The fear that the body must be preserved intact in order to be resurrected is actually a misunderstanding of what resurrection is. Resurrection is transformation, not preservation. It is the passage through death, not the avoidance of death. It is entering into the unknown so completely that the old self no longer exists, and yet something eternal emerges that has always been present beneath the constructed personality. Now, when we turn to examine what the ancient texts actually say about this, setting aside centuries of theological interpretation and going directly to the source, we find something extraordinary. The Apostle Paul, in his letter to the Corinthians, addresses precisely this question with a metaphor that is absolutely essential. He speaks of the sowing of a seed. He says, "What you sow does not come to life unless it dies. The seed must break apart. It must dissolve. It must undergo complete transformation. And from that death emerges not the seed itself, but something entirely new, a plant, a tree, a flowering." Paul is describing resurrection as transformation, not restoration. He is not saying that God will piece back together the exact atoms of your body in their exact configuration. He is saying that God will take what you have been, what you have lived, the essence of who you are, and raise it into a completely new form. And this is profoundly important when we consider cremation, because cremation does nothing to this eternal essence. Cremation does nothing to prevent this spiritual transformation. The ashes are not the self. The body is not the self. They are both forms that the self inhabits temporarily. When the form dissolves, whether slowly through burial or rapidly through cremation, the essence that animated that form remains untouched, uncorrupted, eternal. Here we must address directly something that spirituality has often avoided. The body is not a mistake. The fact that you are embodied is not a punishment. The fact that you have desires, sensations, a physical form that ages and eventually dies is not something to transcend and escape. It is something to integrate, to consciously inhabit, to transform from the inside. This is where Jungian psychology and authentic spirituality converge. The sexual energy that arises in your body is not separate from spiritual energy. The desire you feel is not opposed to your spiritual evolution. These are the same fundamental forces of creation and consciousness expressing themselves through your particular organism. When you repress these forces, when you deny your body, when you split yourself into the spiritual part, good, and the physical part, bad, you cripple your spiritual development. You create exactly the fragmentation that prevents true resurrection. The body cannot be resurrected if it has been rejected in life. The consciousness cannot become whole if it has denied half of itself. And so, the question about cremation is ultimately a question about whether you are capable of fully accepting your embodied existence right now, whether you are willing to inhabit your physical form consciously, whether you can integrate all dimensions of your being. The spiritual and the physical, the transcendent and the earthly, the rational and the instinctual. This integration is what Jung called individuation, and it is precisely what resurrection means in its deepest sense. Let me offer you a concrete example to make this tangible. Imagine a person who has lived a spiritual life devoted to transcendence. They have practiced meditation. They have renounced pleasure. They have denied their body. They have sought to escape into states of pure consciousness, divorced from embodiment. What happens when this person dies? When the body falls away and they encounter the fullness of their own consciousness, they will suddenly realize that they have rejected half of reality. They will suddenly see that the body they denied was not the problem. Their denial was the problem. The consciousness they tried to reach did not require the rejection of embodiment. It required the integration of embodiment. And in that moment after death, faced with this realization, they will experience what might be called remorse, not from God's judgment, but from their own recognition of how much of themselves they abandoned. This is not punishment. This is illumination. And it can be avoided now, in this life, if you choose to consciously integrate all dimensions of your being. You do not need to wait until after death to achieve resurrection. You can begin this resurrection right now. You can begin by accepting your body fully. You can begin by recognizing that the divine is not separate from your flesh, but works through it, in it, as it. You can begin by honoring the physical sensations, the emotional truth, the desires that arise in you, without judging them as separate from the spiritual dimension of your existence. This does not mean acting out every impulse without consciousness. It means bringing consciousness to every impulse. It means seeing your body and all its expressions as sacred, as worthy of witnessing, as part of the divine expression. When you do this, something remarkable begins to occur. You start to experience what might be called embodied spirituality, or sacred sexuality, or conscious integration. You begin to feel yourself as a unified being instead of a divided one. The anxiety that many spiritual people experience, the sense that there is something wrong, that they are not doing enough, that they are somehow failing spiritually, often arises from this internal fragmentation. The conscious part of you is driving forward toward transcendence, while the embodied part of you is being dragged along unwillingly, creating constant internal conflict. When you integrate these dimensions consciously, that conflict dissolves. Peace emerges. And paradoxically, when you stop trying so desperately to escape the body, when you stop fighting against embodiment, you actually access the transcendent dimension far more easily, because you are no longer divided against yourself. This is what all the great wisdom traditions pointed toward, though often the message was distorted through centuries of interpretation and institutional control. The tantric traditions understood this. They celebrated the union of Shiva and Shakti, masculine and feminine, consciousness and embodied energy. The Sufi mystics understood this when they spoke of the sacred encounter between lover and beloved, using erotic language to describe the union with the divine. The Christian mystics understood this when they spoke of the sacred marriage, the union of the bride and the bridegroom, the mystical wedding of the soul with Christ. These were not poetic metaphors obscuring a deeper spiritual truth that was actually about escaping the body. They were direct descriptions of the integration of body and spirit, of matter and consciousness, of the physical and the transcendent. And this integration, this sacred marriage, this alchemy of conscious embodiment, is what resurrection truly is. Now, let us circle back to our original question with this deeper understanding. Does cremation block resurrection? The answer is unambiguously no, not because God has power to resurrect even ashes, though that is true, but because the resurrection that matters does not depend on the physical integrity of the body at all. The resurrection that will transform you completely is the resurrection of consciousness itself, the awakening to the fuller reality that has always been present beneath your constructed personality. And this resurrection is available to you right now. You do not need to wait until death. You can begin today by choosing integration instead of fragmentation, by honoring your body instead of denying it, by bringing consciousness to all dimensions of your being instead of repressing some and exalting others. When you do this, when you truly commit to this work of integration, something shifts. You stop being afraid of dissolution because you understand that dissolution of the form is not the end of what you truly are. You stop being afraid of death because you recognize that you are already dying and being reborn continuously. You stop being afraid of embodiment because you realize that the divine is not waiting somewhere distant, but is present in your flesh, in your sexuality, in your desires, in your mortality. The resurrection you seek is not a future event that depends on keeping your body intact. It is a present possibility that depends only on your willingness to fully inhabit your being as it is right now. And when you choose this integration, this conscious embodiment, this marriage of all your dimensions, you will discover something extraordinary. You are already resurrected. You are already living in resurrection. You are already experiencing the union of heaven and earth, of spirit and matter, of the transcendent and the personal. This union is available now. This wholeness is available now. And when your body does eventually return to the earth or is reduced to ashes, you will have no fear because you will know from direct experience that what you truly are is not contained in the form. What you truly are is the consciousness that animates the form, and that consciousness cannot be cremated. That consciousness cannot be destroyed. That consciousness will simply transition into a new form, will continue on its eternal journey, will experience dimensions of reality that your current embodied form cannot yet perceive. But you can begin to perceive them now, if you choose to. You can begin to integrate now. You can begin to resurrect now. This is the invitation. This is the challenge. This is the transformation that awaits if you are willing to answer the deepest call of your being. Not the call to escape the body, but the call to fully inhabit it, to bring consciousness to it, to recognize it as the sacred vessel through which the infinite expresses itself finitely, to honor it completely, and through this honor, to unlock the resurrection that has always been your birthright, that awaits not in some distant future after death, but in this precious present moment. There is a practice that many spiritual seekers engage in that deserves your attention here, because it relates directly to what we have been exploring. This practice is what might be called the cultivation of conscious presence, the deliberate and sustained attention to what is happening in your body and consciousness right now, in this moment. Most people live their entire lives in a state of unconscious reactivity. They are constantly pulled between past regrets and future anxieties, rarely present to the actual reality unfolding through their senses. And this unconsciousness is precisely the obstacle to resurrection, because resurrection requires presence. It requires awareness. It requires the willingness to witness what is actually occurring, rather than escaping into fantasy or dissociation. When you bring consciousness to your breath, to your body, to the sensations arising moment by moment, you are already beginning the work of resurrection. You are awakening to the reality that has always been present. You are resurrecting the capacity for genuine presence that has been buried under layers of conditioning and distraction. Jung understood this deeply. He called the process of integration the opus, the great work. It is not a work that happens passively. It is something you must actively engage with through sustained attention and courageous self-examination. The cremation question, viewed through this lens, becomes an invitation to examine your own relationship with embodiment and presence. If you are afraid that your body will be lost, that you will be forgotten, that something essential about you will be destroyed, what does that fear reveal about how you are living right now? It reveals that you may be living as if your identity is your form, as if who you are is only your body and your constructed personality. But this is precisely the illusion that must be dissolved. Your identity is not your form. Your essence is not your appearance. You are the consciousness that witnesses the form. You are the awareness that observes the personality. And this consciousness, this awareness cannot be lost. It cannot be cremated. It cannot be destroyed, because it has never been born. It is eternal. It is the ground of all existence. The spiritual masters have always taught this, though their teaching has been obscured by religious dogma and institutional corruption. The Hindu Upanishads speak of the Atman, the eternal self that is never born and never dies, that witnesses all changes but is itself unchanging. The Buddhist traditions speak of sunyata, the emptiness that is not nothingness but the infinite potentiality from which all form emerges. The Christian mystics spoke of the kingdom of heaven that is not a place but a state of consciousness available now, in this present moment. And the Taoist sages understood that the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao, that what is most real is what cannot be grasped, what cannot be held, what cannot be destroyed because it was never created. All these traditions point toward the same fundamental truth. What you truly are is beyond form, beyond time, beyond death. The body will die, the personality will dissolve, the constructed self will crumble into dust or ash. But the consciousness that animated these temporary forms will continue on its eternal journey. And when you truly understand this, not merely intellectually, but with your whole being, your fear of cremation, your fear of death, your fear of embodiment dissolves. Because you are no longer identified with what can be destroyed. You are no longer defending what must inevitably fall away. You are no longer resisting what is natural, inevitable, eternal. This is the peace that passes understanding. This is the freedom that can only come through complete acceptance of what is. Now, there is one more dimension of this teaching that is essential to grasp, and this is where the Jungian understanding of the shadow becomes crucial. Jung taught that every individual carries within themselves an unconscious dimension, what he called the shadow self. This shadow contains everything we have rejected, repressed, denied, everything we have deemed unacceptable and pushed into the unconscious in our attempts to be good, to be spiritual, to be acceptable to society and to ourselves. And here is the extraordinary insight. The shadow is not evil. It is not something that must be destroyed or escaped. The shadow is simply the rejected parts of our wholeness. It is the disowned aspects of our own being. And until we bring consciousness to the shadow, until we integrate these rejected parts back into our conscious identity, we remain fragmented, incomplete, divided against ourselves. This is absolutely essential to understand when we are discussing embodiment and resurrection, because sexuality in all its dimensions is frequently relegated to the shadow. In religious traditions that teach the body is sinful, the sexual impulse is pushed into the unconscious. It does not disappear. It does not vanish. It simply becomes unconscious, and thus it exerts its power from the darkness, creating shame, guilt, compulsion, and the internal fragmentation we have been discussing. The resurrection cannot be complete while the shadow remains unconscious. The wholeness cannot be achieved while you are refusing to acknowledge half of what you are. And so the genuine spiritual path, the authentic journey toward individuation and resurrection, requires the courageous descent into the shadow, the willingness to look at what you have rejected in yourself, the commitment to integrate these disowned aspects with compassion and consciousness. This is not the same as acting out every unconscious impulse. That would simply be replacing one form of unconsciousness with another. Rather, it is about bringing consciousness to what is unconscious. It is about recognizing your desires without being enslaved by them. It is about acknowledging your shadow nature without being controlled by it. It is about the integration that allows you to become more fully, more consciously, more authentically yourself. When you do this integration work, something remarkable occurs. The compulsive quality of unconscious desires diminishes. The shame that has been attached to natural human impulses begins to dissolve. The internal war between the good part of you and the bad part of you comes to an end. And in the place of that war, a new wholeness emerges. You become more genuine. You become more present. You become more capable of authentic love, authentic creativity, authentic spirituality. This is what resurrection really looks like in lived experience. It is not something that happens after death. It is something that is available to you now if you are willing to do the work. So when you ask yourself whether cremation blocks resurrection, perhaps the deeper question you should be asking is this: am I willing to fully resurrect myself right now? Am I willing to integrate all the parts of myself that I have rejected? Am I willing to bring consciousness to my shadow? Am I willing to honor my body, my desires, my humanity as sacred? Am I willing to stop fighting against my own embodied existence and instead consciously inhabit every dimension of my being? These are the real questions. And the answers to these questions will determine not whether you are resurrected after death, but whether you are alive in resurrection right now, in this precious, irreplaceable present moment that is constantly being offered to you. There is a final teaching that must be offered here, a teaching that synthesizes everything we have discussed and points toward the practical transformation that awaits you. This teaching comes from the alchemical tradition, which deeply influenced Jung's psychology and which understood the transformation of matter into spirit, not as an escape from physicality, but as the conscious elevation and transfiguration of the physical itself. In alchemy, the goal was not to deny matter, but to recognize the divine spark hidden within matter, to work with the material world consciously, to transform lead into gold, not literally but symbolically, which means transforming the base, unconscious material of your own embodied existence into conscious, sacred, intentional living. The alchemical wedding, the sacred marriage of opposites, is precisely what happens when you commit to true embodiment and conscious spirituality simultaneously. When your body no longer feels like an enemy to overcome, but like a sacred partner in the great work of consciousness itself, something shifts fundamentally. The resistance dissolves, the internal war ends, and what emerges is a capacity for authentic presence, genuine compassion, real power. The power that comes not from domination or escape, but from integration and acceptance. This is the resurrection that matters. This is the wholeness that is available to you. The question about cremation fades into insignificance when you realize that what you truly are cannot be touched by fire or buried in earth or dissolved by any material process. What you truly are is the eternal witness, the consciousness itself, experiencing itself through your particular form in this lifetime, preparing for its next expression beyond this form. The body returns to dust, the form dissolves, but the essential reality that animated that form continues eternally. And if you die knowing this, if you die having integrated your shadow, honored your body, brought consciousness to your being, then you will transition into what comes next with peace, with wholeness, with the knowing that you have truly lived and truly loved in this earthly existence. This is the promise, this is the possibility, this is what resurrection truly means.